Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Ariel Johnson from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting human evolution research and sharing discoveries in programs like this. We want to thank Anna Gordon-Getty and Camilla and George Smith, whose generous support made this episode of Lunch Break Science possible. Here with us today is Leakey Foundation research grant recipient, Dr. Jacinta Beehner. Jacinta, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Ariel. Thanks for inviting me.
Jacinta is joining us from Michigan, where she is a professor of anthropology and psychology at the University of Michigan. Jacinta studies gelada monkeys in the Simi Mountains of Ethiopia and is co-director of the Simi Gelada Research Project there. She also studies white-faced capuchins in Costa Rica, where she is co-director of the Capuchins at Toboga Project. Today she'll be discussing her work studying Geladas, investigating female reproductive strategies. Before we hear from Jacinta, though, for those of you joining us live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Leakey Foundation Live, you can leave questions for Jacinta at any time during the episode in the chat, and she will answer as many of those questions as you can at the end of the episode. The earlier you get those questions in, the more likely Jacinta will be able to answer them. Jacinta, I am really excited to have you here today and have this opportunity to feature your research. It's just about a year ago that the Leakey Foundation's fellow travel tour visited your site in Ethiopia. We want to thank you and your colleagues for hosting our travelers. They had such a wonderful experience. You're seeing some photos from their trip right now and a little sneak peek in looking at your field site.
Yeah, we really put them to work.
Yeah, it was. It's just so gorgeous.
And the geladas were fantastic that day. I think that they stayed in the same place until about noon. And so it was just one of those magical days.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It just, I would have loved to be there. It's just so gorgeous.
Whenever I describe this trip to other people, I say that the trustees had tails in their laps as they got there.
So my first question for you is, what are gelada monkeys, and why is learning about their behavior interesting?
So I am glad you said that, because I was really glad to hear you call them gelada monkeys. For far too long, people have incorrectly called them gelada baboons, but geladas are not baboons. So that's the first thing I want to say. And I think I even have a publication that says geladas are not baboons. They are close relatives. They're in a different genus, though. They're in Theropithecus, and baboons are in the genus Papio. Now, there are several traits that make geladas really unique among primates. I think the first one about them is that they're the only primate in the world that eats mostly grass. They've been called the primate cows of the primate world because they just live in these huge herds. They eat grass all day long. But weirdly enough, they really don't have any specialized morphology for digesting grass. Like, for example, cows can ruminate and they regurgitate their food and they chew it all over again. We get rodents who actually eat their first round of fecal pellets so that they can get more nutrients out of them. And we even have primates that eat leaves and they have these sacculated stomachs to digest cellulose, but geladas really have nothing that we know of, even though they eat grass. So what we think they might do is that they eat all day long, which is known as bulk foraging. But another adaptation that we're just starting to investigate is the specialized gut microbiome. And that might help them break down cellulose, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And stay tuned for new research from our project on that.
Yeah, definitely. Keep us posted.
Yeah. So, and another thing that most people comment on immediately is the huge groups. Sometimes we see thousands and thousands of them in a single herd. They actually live in the largest natural groups of any primate in the world, except humans, of course. And I remember one day we counted up to 1,200 animals. We actually even lost track of the count at about 1,200 because they kept moving around. And then we didn't know if we'd already counted them. So these group sizes are just unlike anything else. And usually a lot of the tourists who come out here think that we feed them, or they think that this is unnatural, but this is their natural size. And the huge groups that they are part of aren't just piles and piles of geladas, even though it looks like piles and piles of geladas. There's actually organization to the herds. So they live in what's called a multi-level society. And at the core of this society is a family unit. Sometimes we call them one male units, but I'll probably just keep calling them family units. They're made up of a dominant male, about 1 to 12 adult females and their offspring. And the females are all relatives, and they rarely leave the family group unless it gets too big, in which case it might fission into 2 smaller family groups. So the family groups are the core units, but then many family groups can come together. They forage across the day, and this is called a band. And this can be of maybe 250 animals. And then all the members of the band that come into contact with one another across the year are called the community. And these are the huge groups that I just told you about before, the thousands and thousands. But most of the day-to-day behavior that we see takes place within the family group. So there's family dynamics among the females. They often form really close bonds with a few other females, like their moms or their oldest daughters. Sometimes they do bicker over a good feeding spot, but for the most part, they get along. And I think the most exciting behavior that we see within these family groups is the dominant leader male trying to hang on to his position as alpha. Because there's these roving bachelor males, and these roving bachelor males are just waiting for their chance to take over his dominant position so that they get to mate with females. So when the bachelors are successful, we call these takeovers. Now, the bachelors are so fun to watch. It's everyone's favorite group. They live together in these gangs of about 5 to 10 males. And just like you might expect, they wake up super late. Sometimes they don't come up from the cliffs until about 11 o'clock. And even after they come up over the cliff's edge, they just sprawl out lazily in the sun. Like, it almost looks like they've been drinking all night. And of course, we just make jokes to no end. Like I said, they're everyone's favorite group. But you can also tell that they're just trouble. They strut their stuff. Sometimes they walk in complete sync with one another. And it makes me laugh every single time. These males are just looking for signs of weakness among the leader males. And this, of course, makes leader males really nervous because they need to put on a show. They need to show the bachelors that they're not to be messed with. So the males need to basically show the bachelors that they're strong. And there's 2 ways that they can do this. The first way that they can do this is their chest patch. So one thing you've probably noticed is these males have a patch of red skin on their chest. And we think the chest patch is a warning to the bachelors so that the males with redder chest patches are essentially showing that they're stronger than males with paler chest patches. And we have a student who's following up on this now. But a second way for leader males to exhibit strength is to show off a bit in front of the bachelors. So they do this ritualized display. Often it starts with a leader male. He solicits a mock chase from the bachelors. And the leader male lopes around, and the bachelors are sort of following behind. Nobody's trying to catch anybody. It's all just a show. But at the end of the show, the leader male goes up into a tree, and he utters, well, if he can stand in the tree, he utters a series of about 3 to 4 loud calls. You just saw those. And what's so great is the bachelors just sit there and watch. Here's another one. So most of those males are bachelors, with the guy high in the tree being the leader. I love that clip. So these displays are just fantastic. But there is evidence to suggest that the more a leader male does one of these displays, the less likely he is to be a target of a takeover in the following months. So they seem to work.
So geladas are only found in the highlands of Ethiopia. Why is that? And what is that environment like?
So if you're not right along the edge of the cliff, the habitat actually looks a lot like just a grassy field or like a farm, except for the super thin air, because we are at such high altitude. We're upwards of 3,500 meters, routinely at about 11,500 feet. Aside from that, you wouldn't necessarily know that you are in the mountains until you turn around and see the mountains behind you. So it's like a grassy plateau, and we're above the tree line. So there's not that many trees except for the ones you just saw. So it's sort of giant lobelia, which looks like a large succulent, and then the heather tree, which looks more like a bush than a tree. But if you move to the edge of the plateau, it's kind of like looking off into the Grand Canyon. There's the lowlands almost a kilometer straight below you. And especially in the dry season, it can be really similar to the Grand Canyon. But this totally changes during the wet season. Everything turns green. And it's not a tropical lush green all the time. Often it can be this foggy, cold, cloudy green. And we literally find ourselves living constantly in a cloud around us. So I spent a year there during one of my sabbaticals with my kids. My kids were 4 and 6 at the time. And I remember they loved to see that where our hut was located, so you can see that here, it was actually above the clouds. So in the rainy season, those clouds would climb up the side of the cliff and engulf our hut. And the kids would run to the door and they'd have to shut the door shut. And they'd say, "Mom, we got to keep the clouds out," because the clouds come into the house. But it was really magical.
Oh, it sounds magical. One of the programs that the Leakey Foundation supports is emergency funding for long-term primate research field sites called the Primate Research Fund. The Primate Research Fund is a lifeline for projects facing gaps in funding or other unexpected emergencies. Since we launched the program in 2017, 15 grants have been awarded, and you're seeing some of the field sites we have funded right now. So gorgeous, gorgeous sites of the Simeon Mountains Gelada Research Project received funding through this fund. How did it impact your site and your research?
Well, we've been really lucky. Our gelada research has been almost continuously funded by the National Science Foundation, the NSF. And we usually renew our NSF a year before the grant expires. But a few years ago, the government shutdown combined with a change in their submission protocol. So they moved from like a set deadline, they were moving to a rolling deadline. But this combination of these two things happening at the same time meant that we couldn't apply for another 6 months. Yep. And then if you add to that the 6 months it takes to review the grant, we were looking at a year and our funding was up. And it basically, we were facing a gap in funding. It was right around this time that I heard for the first time about the Leaky Primate Research Fund, and I think I applied the next day. And we got a positive response within a few weeks. I mean, it was really fantastic. I think I nearly cried with relief. The funding picked up at exactly the moment the NSF money ran out. And for the next 10 months, we depended entirely on the Leakey Foundation to keep our research going. So we were fortunate to then receive another 5 years of funding from the NSF. So it was like seamless. The Leakey Foundation, we ran out of NSF, Leakey picked up, and it just overlapped perfectly with when our next NSF picked up. And had we not had that, we would have had to go down to like a shoestring budget, really cutting back in samples and monitoring. So I can't tell you how important that was. To not get that funding gap. And the Leakey Primate Fund's really like no other grant I know of. It's just emergency funds to keep long-term research running. So especially for primate projects where you can't just close up shop for a year, we have to follow the story for each animal. We know individuals, we track them, we know them. And the highest value data set that we have for these long-term projects on primates is the story for each individual.
We're really excited to announce that all donations that are made to the Primate Research Fund, and we have shared a link in the chat, will actually be quadrupled by generous donors, and in Jeff Mungeon-Calda and Ann and Gordon Getty. We're really excited to be able to share that. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. But now that we've kind of heard about your research site and the geladas, what is your background? How did you become interested in studying anthropology?
Well, I was a bio major in undergrad, but then I studied abroad in Kenya. And when I was in Kenya, I just fell in love with the East African wildlife. I knew I had a future career with animal behavior, but it wasn't until then that I knew which animals. So I set out to study social mammals in East Africa. I applied to work with lions, hyenas, zebras, elephants, baboons. I ended up taking a grad position at Washington University in St. Louis, studying baboons. And I remember it was my first year in grad school, it was 1996, that I went to the joint meetings of the American and International Primatological Society. This was held at the University of Wisconsin. And that's when I saw a plenary talk by Robert Sapolsky. I'm sure many of you have maybe seen Robert Sapolsky. He gave a talk that was entitled Endocrinology al Fresco.
Ooh.
His ability to get, he was talking about his research on getting hormones from wild baboons to see how they respond to stressful situations around them. And he's really charismatic. And of course, I was immediately hooked. So I knew from that moment that I was going to study hormones in wild baboons for my PhD. And my PhD was on reproductive strategies in female baboons. Then after my PhD, I went on to do 2 postdocs. I worked with Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney on Chacma baboons in the Botswana, Okavango Delta. And then I also worked with Gene Altman on the Amboseli yellow baboons in Kenya. And each time I kept studying reproductive endocrinology in wild baboons. But my heart was entirely still in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And so when I finally was hired as a faculty member at the University of Michigan, I decided I'm going back to Ethiopia. So I set up shop permanently. But instead of studying baboons, I wanted to get data on a comparative species. So we set out to study geladas.
And you also study capuchin monkeys now in Costa Rica. What questions are you looking at when studying the capuchins? How is it very, very different studying their behavior?
Thanks for asking that. Yeah. Moving to capuchins has been so fun. So first of all, I can't even imagine a more different field site from the gelada one. So instead of mountains and cold, monkeys on the ground, our new field site is a tropical forest. So it's hot, it's humid. We have monkeys way up in the trees. This is actually drone footage of our site. And I have to say, my hat goes off to all researchers who've been studying monkeys in trees for decades, because this is super hard. With geladas on the ground, if I don't know who someone is, I just walk around them until I see their nick in the ear or a mark on their mouth. But with capuchins way up in the tree, I have to just wait until the monkey decides to show me who he is. And it really does slow down data collection. But on the positive side, capuchins are so much smarter than any primate I've ever studied. And I've not studied chimps, but there's all kinds of possibilities for research. So we're going to take a much more experimental approach with the capuchins at the Toboga Forest. So in collaboration with Dr. Marcela Benitez, we've built platforms where we can test our wild population on different cognitive tests. Marcela has done a lot of the research on cooperation in captive capuchins, and now she's going to extend a lot of these studies to the wild. So we're also interested in using platforms to record the behaviors of individuals, so we can use cameras combined with facial recognition. We also want to get vocalizations from these monkeys. We can do this using acoustic cameras to figure out who's giving the vocalization, combined with recording equipment. And then we can even learn new individuals in different parts of the forest where we've not habituated capuchins.
That's so neat. I feel like I have a million questions about that, but we should probably go into your talk and maybe talk to you another time about the capuchins. So Let's dig deeper into gelada behavior and turn the virtual floor over to you, Jacinta.
Great. Can you see this? Wait, I have to share my screen.
Oh, yes.
Let me share screen first. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. The photographs you have of your site are just amazing. Here, I will put that up and I will, there you go.
All right. Now you can see it. Is that right? Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with a story that happened during my first month out with the geladas. So on January 31st in 2006, I watched my first male takeover. So a bachelor male named Fuji, he's pictured here, he challenged one of the dominant leader males of one of our family groups. And this male is named Royal. So after a few hours of really intense fighting, Fuji, the challenger, had killed Royal, and now he found himself the leader of the new leader male. So it was really exciting. It was my first takeover. And I remember at the time thinking that all the drama related to takeovers is going to be about the males. But pretty soon I realized that actually the most exciting thing about these takeovers is what happens to the females. So in the weeks to come, I watched a dramatic change take place in all the females in Fuji's group. Okay, so just to set the stage, before the takeover, Royal's family group, just like every family group out there, had females in every reproductive stage. So there's lactating females, you can tell because they're suckling an infant. There's pregnant females, and you can tell pregnant females because they have this bright, bright red chest. And then we also have cycling females. Now, geladas are like baboons. They do produce visible sexual swellings when they're fertile, and this is a stage we call cycling. But unlike baboons, their sexual swellings appear as like swollen beads around their chest patch instead of on their butts. And of course, we also have young females who haven't yet matured. So, okay, we have females in every stage of reproduction before the takeover. But a few weeks after the takeover, no matter what reproductive stage they were in before, they all begin developing signs of cycling, and they mate with the new male. In this case, it was Fuji. And I remember at the time thinking, whoa, what an unbelievable coincidence. Fuji took over just the right group at just the right time. But I soon realized it wasn't a coincidence whatsoever. And as the years went by, I would watch this again and again after every single takeover. So what could be going on? What is causing these females to all go back to what appears to be a fertile condition? Luckily, here was me, a researcher interested in female reproduction and the hormones that drive it, and I stumbled upon a puzzle of this proportion. So I was practically giddy with the goldmine discovery that I'd stumbled into. So my primary research program from really that moment on has been figuring out what's going on with each reproductive stage. Why do they return to fertility after this male arrives? So if you're putting yourself in the position of Fuji, the male, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, of course, this makes sense. If he's able to induce females into fertility again, doesn't matter how he does it, it means he has a lot more females to mate with. Why should he wait for them to raise offspring from some other male? And you're partly right. Males that could do this would obviously be at a huge advantage. But we also have to think about this problem from the perspective of the females. Females aren't just passive subjects in evolution. And from their perspective, they need to invest in every single offspring, regardless of whether it's Fuji's or whether it's Royals. And so what this does is it sets up a situation of sexual conflict where the evolutionary fitness of males and females is at odds with one another. Now, the pinnacle of this sexual conflict is when a male kills the infant of the females in the group. Remember, these aren't his kids, and he's a lot bigger than the females, so it's not that hard for him to do this. But if a male does kill an infant, this then accelerates the mother's return to a fertile state, and he gets to mate with her a lot sooner than if he hadn't killed the infant. Okay, so let's take a look now. What's going on in each of these cases from the female's evolutionary perspective? Why should she return to fertility when a new male arrives? Well, obviously, I don't have time to go into each case in a lot of detail, so I'm going to give you the abbreviated version for each one. First, I'm going to start with lactating females. Well, guess what? They're faking it. They're not fertile at all. So they produce these outward signs of fertility, and the male gets to mate with them, but they never get pregnant. They just continue to wean their previous kid. So the ploy seems to work. Lactating females who showed these signs of false fertility, they avoided infanticide much better than those who didn't. Yay! Lactating females for the win. So just so you know, I always cheer for the females in these evolutionary arms races. I mean, come on. The males kill kids, so they're super hard to like. All right, what about pregnant females? Well, if we track the hormones for these females across the pregnancies, we know that they are not faking it. They abort their pregnancies. They return to a fertile state, really from the moment the new male arrives. Yay, males. Okay, so I know, and this is called the Bruce effect. I know the Bruce effect sounds like a very strange thing to do, but it actually happens in other species as well. You can think of the Bruce effect as a sort of I don't know, cost-benefit analysis, and it's played out in the reproductive physiology of these females over evolutionary time. So this analysis has repeatedly come down on the side of, nope, not worth it. So every time a new male arrives, females just start over with him. And you can think of this sort of as an evolutionary version of the sunk cost fallacy. So the sunk cost fallacy is the idea that human behavior is often guided by the investment that we've already sunk into a decision. So although the investment's a sunk cost, we still continue to invest in this bad decision. It's also called the Concord Fallacy. It was named after this supersonic passenger jet that never quite delivered, despite all the billions and billions of dollars it took to build. So we're seeing that reproductive biology understands sunk costs, and it does know when to abandon a pregnancy that's doomed. So since the new male's just going to kill their infant anyway, pregnant females just abort and they start over with the new male. So they haven't invested all that much in this pregnancy so far. So it actually doesn't leave them that far behind. And this then reduces the sexual conflict, because once she's aborted, the males and the females are actually on the same side. All right, cycling females, I just put them in here for completion. They just keep on cycling. They conceive with the new male. There's no mysteries here. All right, last one. Let's move on to immature females. Why do we suddenly get a bunch of females maturing right after the new male arrives? So normally females mature at about 4.5 years of age. And there's lots of variability around this mean, just like in geladas, and just like there's lots of variability around the mean age at maturation in lots of species. But the difference is that usually this variability is caused by her diet. So females that are really well-fed might mature a lot earlier than females who are less well-fed. But this is different. Now we're seeing that a social factor, so this arrival of a male, is actually triggering maturation. So what's going on? Well, like I said, some of these females are maturing early. This is what we call the Vandenberg effect. So in rodents, we routinely see this. We think it's adaptive for females to accelerate maturity in rodents because it gives them a head start on reproduction. But I don't think that's what's going on in primates. I mean, these primates live 20 years. A few months is not going to be worth it. So we're still trying to figure out why maturing early might actually be a good thing for geladas. I think probably it's more likely a timing issue. So for example, timing reproduction with the arrival of a male is just always a good thing, just as we saw for the pregnant females. But remember, there's also some females who are maturing late. And super interesting, these females were in family groups where their dad was the previous leader male. So he was a leader for a long time, and these females were ready to mature. They're his daughters, but they didn't. They seemed to just go into this like holding pattern as long as their dad was the only male available. Then as soon as he's overthrown, they lift this suppression and they mature. So clearly geladas are able to delay maturation as a mechanism for inbreeding avoidance. So it seems like what we're seeing is that female geladas are super responsive to a social variable, this arrival of a new male. And we see this response externally with their sexual swellings and their behavior, but we also see this response in their hormones. All of these females show a rise in estrogen the moment the male arrives. So we think it's this estrogen that might mediate the reproductive changes that we're seeing in these females. And of course, we're also focused on the adaptive story. We have to see how these short-term reproductive changes might play out in some long run for these females' evolutionary fitness. But what's cool is that even when you see these really awful but successful male strategies like infanticide, we see that females devise tricks of their own. So in the battle of the sexes, there's always a counter strategy to every strategy. And that is the end. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I had a little bit of difficulty coming back, but I'm here. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful talk. We'll now be taking some questions from the audience. If you haven't gotten your question in and are watching live, be sure to get those questions in now. I have a quick question for you while we are waiting for questions to come in. You say you collect you study hormones. How do you collect the hormones from wild animals?
Oh, that's right. So I didn't give all my methods, but we actually, rather than dart them like Sapolsky did, we are able to track their hormones by collecting their fecal samples. So thankfully, they're geladas and they eat grass, and so they're pooping all day long. So we quickly stick tubes in the ground. Then we collect them using this little battery-powered homogenizer. We take them back to our field lab. That's what you're seeing here. And we process them a little bit more. But then we bring them back home to do the actual assays, and we're able to get steroid hormones out of the fecal samples. Like, so we can get testosterone, we can get cortisol or glucocorticoids, we can get estrogens, and we can get progestins.
That's so neat. But it's got to be weird to collect.
It's much better when the animals don't eat meat. I'll say that. So geladas, it's like, I mean, it's grass. But when we had baboons and they were eating, squirrels and things, it can get lots grosser.
Oh yeah, I remember that from a primatology class I took about how the smell of the fecal matter is so different depending on what they're eating. It's much more pleasant.
Yeah. So all you vegetarians out there can feel much better to knowing that your poo smells nicer.
I know. I think we had a talk with Karen Stryer a while back, and she was talking about how the monkeys she studies, their feces smells like cinnamon. That sounds. So let's take some. Yeah. Our first question from the audience is, what do we know about their natural predators?
That's a great question. So they sleep on cliffs every single night, and obviously they've had predators in their evolutionary past. Most likely, even today, is hyenas and leopards. However, the park itself has very few of these left. So, predation is not a high source of mortality for our animals anymore. But for sure, in the past, it's been hyenas and leopards. There are some jackals and the Ethiopian wolf that wander around, but they are not a threat. And often the geladas will bark quickly when they see the jackal, but the moment they realize it's not a domestic dog, they go right back to feeding. So I think that in the past, these have not been a big predator. The other one thing that probably has been a source of predation for youngsters, like for the juveniles, could be birds of prey, like the lammergeier.
Oh, okay. Do you have another do we have another question? Yes, we do. It's coming up. Because the geladas are in such a large social group, is there a connection to elevated cortisol levels and psychological stress-related diseases, a la Sapolsky?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the idea that animals would be stressed by being too close together must be related to something that affects their fitness. So in and of itself, animals shouldn't be stressed about neighbors being nearby if in fact their fitness is not affected. Because geladas have evolved to be in these large groups, I don't actually think that they are stressed out by animals being close to them. I think that they can get in fights with each other, and we do start to see that as the group itself, so the family group, as it gets larger and larger, the females don't do as well. And I don't want to say too much because I know there's another lunch break science with Amy Lou, and I know we'll talk more about that. However, the idea is that there does seem to be this friction at a certain point in the family group where the females go their separate ways. And so that kind of like pressure with too many animals in one group, I think does affect their reproductive success, probably does contribute to higher glucocorticoids causing these fissions.
Interesting.
But the sort of piled animals on top of each other, they love that. I'm convinced that they're perfectly happy to have 1,200 animals all close together.
We have another question. You might have mentioned this, but have you seen similar behaviors with takeovers in other primates?
Yes. And yes, I love takeovers. So the thing about the family groups in Geladas is that it is a one male unit. There could be these follower males, but for the most part, it's one male doing all the mating. Another male comes in, takes over, and becomes the new dominant male. What we see in chacma baboons, we also call them takeovers. But all males can mate. They just don't always do mate. So the alpha male does do most of the mating. And so when there's a shift in the alpha, we call that a takeover. But it's a little different because some of the other males are also mating as well. So, but we see similar things. The male gets taken over and infanticide shortly follows. Now, in some groups, like the yellow baboons, the males also will come in and take over this alpha position. But because reproductive skew is less, so the alpha doesn't necessarily get this high proportion of mating compared to the beta, compared to the third ranking male, at least not as much as what we see in chacmas, that infanticide might not actually be a very good reproductive strategy for these males, as opposed to with chacmas. If you're alpha, you're going to get to do most of the mating, so it makes sense to kill all these babies. If you're a gelada and you come in, it makes sense to kill babies. So you see these differences. That's a good question.
It was a really good question. Let's see here. We have another one coming up. How has the COVID pandemic affected your research, your students' research, and your data sets?
Yes, that's a really painful question. So we had to evacuate both of our field sites when COVID-19 hit. And I think I was interviewed right afterwards. I can't remember where it showed, but it was, I can hear the emotion in my voice because we were evacuating people and it was scary and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But luckily we have, and other projects are doing this as well, we have people on the ground locally. So we have a local Costa Rican staff who've been maintaining data collection with masks and protocols. We have our Ethiopian staff who are still on the ground maintaining data collection. So we feel really fortunate that we've been able to keep the basic data collection coming. And, it's just the story behind each individual that we need to continue. So they've been able to keep that part up. But certainly COVID has affected our data collection. Our sampling has gone down. Our real rich behavioral data has gone down. But we're maintaining, we're maintaining and we're keeping the story up so that we can pick up when it passes.
We have a question coming in from Ethiopia. Thank you again. Any challenges over your study period and probability in the future?
Yes. Hi, Belina. Thank you for asking this question. So we do have some challenges. I mean, Ethiopia right now is experiencing, as you know, challenges to political stability and things like that. We feel really confident in our relationships with people on the ground there. Thanks to you, Belina, and all of your help with the park office. We're really grateful. I feel like we can continue this story moving forward, and that we can pick up where we left off when everything's passed. So thank you.
My last question for you today is, what is the importance of long-term primate field sites and research?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, I've experienced this myself. Is like, I feel like biology departments, which is, I do identify as a biologist in many ways. I feel like biology departments across the world are sort of splitting into departments that study components of life. So genetics, molecules, cells, organs, organ systems, or they study the aggregates of these forms of life. So big things like populations, species dynamics, ecosystems. So you get the small and the big. But what seems to be increasingly lost in the biological sciences is the middle ground, the study of these individual animals. And to study individual animals, we need to know and understand the small things around them, so their internal mechanisms. But we also need to understand the really big things around them, so the environment that they live in. But to put it all together into an integrative framework of behavior, we have to put everything together. And we need to know individuals across their entire lives. So like if you're studying fruit flies, that's just several days. But for primates who really do live these long, rich lives, it can be several decades. So we really have to have boots on the ground 24/7 to just keep up with this soap opera. So we need to follow individuals from birth until death so that we can understand the short and the long-term implications of these different behaviors on health, on fitness. But just one more thing is that our presence on the ground at these sites also helps with conservation. So I don't have this kind of pressure at my 2 primate sites, but there are many long-term primate sites where the research presence of the team themselves on the ground is really the only thing that prevents poachers or logging or any other human enterprises that need that land. And so the researchers are keeping those people from moving in. So in some sense, like many of us are the stewards that keep these ecosystems protected. So even if we don't have a full-on conservation arm to our research, we are keeping our charismatic primates protected. And we end up protecting all the other less charismatic species in the process.
Well, thank you so much. To echo what you've just said, Jacinta, long-term studies of primate sites in the wild are critical to helping understand not only our closest living relatives, but they're also critical to protecting vulnerable primates that are teetering on the brink of extinction. The Leakey Foundation's Primate Research Fund helps us keep long-term research sites going no matter what. During this global pandemic, we are just getting so many applications, more than ever before, and we really need the help of all of you out there to help us protect vulnerable populations of primates and support research and local staffs. If you give to the Primate Research Fund today, your gift will be quadruple matched thanks to the generous support of Anne and Gordon Getty and Jeff Calda. We want to thank you all for watching today, especially those of you out there who are helping fund research like Jacinta's and other sites around the world. Jacinta, again, just thank you so much for sharing your amazing research. We're just so excited to be able to share it, and excited to have part 2 at the end of January featuring your colleague Amy Liu.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really been an absolute pleasure to be here today.
You can visit us at leakeyfoundation.org to learn more about the Leakey Foundation, Jacinta Beehner, as well as how you can help support research like hers, the Primate Research Fund, and education programs like Lunch Break Science. All donations made to the Primate Research Fund will be quadrupled by generous donors, meaning your impact will be quadrupled. On December 3rd, we meet Leakey Foundation scientist Isaiah Nengo and learn about his work studying fossils in Kenya and his team's discovery of a 13-million-year-old baby ape skull. Be sure to subscribe to the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or sign up for our newsletter to be the first to hear about upcoming episodes, as well as groundbreaking discoveries in human evolution research. If you're still hungry for science and can't wait until December 3rd, check out the Leakey Foundation's award-winning podcast, Origin Stories. Origin Stories is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Lunch Break Science is made possible through the generous support of Anne and Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge.